Tonight, we step into one of Korea's most haunting unsolved mysteries, the disappearance of the Kim family in 1938. This isn't just folklore. This is a real case that investigators still whisper about nearly a century later. Imagine a lonely farmhouse in Gyeonggi province, shutters closed tight, a single oil lamp still burning on the table, but not a soul inside. By the end of this story, you'll have to decide for yourself. Was this a brutal crime, or a covenant older than memory? Comment if you dare open that farmhouse door, and hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens when we uncover the truth. The Kims were not the kind of family that anyone in the village would have remembered for scandal or gossip. They lived quietly, almost invisibly, in a farmhouse that sat at the edge of Gyeonggi province, where the road bent toward the tree line, as though even the path hesitated before entering the woods. Their home was small, a low two-room structure with its thatched roof weighed down by winter snow, smoke curling like thin grey ribbons into the white sky. Father Kim was a man whose entire being seemed shaped by the soil he worked. Shoulders stooped from years of ploughing, hands calloused, eyes narrow and alert as though measuring every hour of daylight. He was meticulous, the kind of man who would realign the wooden bar across the gate until it sat perfectly straight, even if no one was there to see. That bar was not just wood. It was a boundary between the world and the family he guarded. He was not talkative, but when he did speak, it was in a tone that silenced the children instantly. Mother Kim had been known for her gentle humming and her soft smile, but that particular winter, her humming had grown stranger. Not a tune anyone recognized, but something low, almost mournful, drifting through the air at odd hours as if she were answering a call from somewhere deep under the frozen earth. She moved more slowly that year, pausing often to stare at the well, her breath white in the cold, her face unreadable. Some neighbors said they saw her lips move, whispering, but when they asked what she was saying, she only smiled faintly and told them it was nothing. The 6 Kim children were the pulse of the house, scattering warmth through the icy days. The youngest, Eerie, barely 6, followed her siblings everywhere, her little scarf dragging in the snow, her laughter high and clear as a bell. Hyun and Bin, the 10-year-old twins, left the yard full of crisscrossed footprints from their endless games, turning every patch of snow into a battlefield or a racetrack until Mother chased them inside to shake the snow off their clothes. The eldest, Ji-yeon, was 15, her hair tied back neatly as she hauled buckets of water or led the ox across the frosted field, her pride in helping father unmistakable. Between them were 2 more children, quiet, obedient, who learned to chop kindling and mend tools before most city children ever held a pencil. Together, they formed a picture of rural Korean life so ordinary it could have been drawn from a textbook. Every morning began the same way, father waking before dawn, shaking the frost off his coat, stepping outside into the bitter dark to check the sky, mother lighting the fire, coaxing the first flames with careful patience, filling the house with the smell of burning wood and boiled barley tea, the children rising one by one, rubbing their eyes, pulling on stiff jackets, huddling around the fire until the warmth returned to their fingers. The year was 1938, and the winter was cruel. The kind of cold that cracked wooden rafters and turned water buckets into blocks of ice. The river nearby had frozen so solid that it made a deep groaning sound when the weight of snow pressed down on it, a sound that carried across the fields like a warning. Every day was a test of endurance. Gather enough wood, mend the roof where the wind tore at it, keep the animals fed, keep the rice jar from emptying too soon. But to the children, it was simply life. They chased each other through the snow, shrieking, cheeks red, until Mother called them in. They sat near the fire and roasted chestnuts, giggling when one popped open too loudly. Life was work, yes, but it was still filled with moments of laughter and play, with the soft comfort of knowing that night would come, the mats would be rolled out, and everyone would sleep close together while the wind rattled the shutters. Inside, the house was a small but perfect world. Clay jars lined up against the wall, each labelled in Father's careful hand. Soy sauce, bean paste, dried grain. The hearth smoked gently, and the iron pot sent up fragrant steam. Near the stove, a few rough drawings were scratched into the wood. Horses, stick figures, circles that might have been the sun. Socks hung on a line to dry, dripping meltwater into a pan. Father's boots sat neatly near the door. Even strangers noticed how clean and orderly the Kim house was, as if the family believed that to keep the house in order was to keep the world itself from falling apart. The neighbours still came by from time to time, trudging through the snow to share bits of news. Another village had been visited by soldiers. A family had fled toward the coast. A cousin had not been seen since the last market day. When these visitors stepped into the Kim's home, they often remarked on how peaceful it felt, how still, how normal. As if the troubles that darkened the rest of the country had not yet touched this patch of earth. The Kims did not talk about the war. Father Kim only grunted when the subject came up, and the conversation turned quickly to weather, to crops, to the condition of the ox's hooves. It was as though speaking of danger might summon it. There were small moments that would only later seem like warnings. Mother Kim humming to herself while standing in the yard long after dark. Ji-yeon waking once or twice in the night, saying she heard footsteps near the well. The gate bar found crooked in the morning when Father swore he had set it straight the night before. But those moments passed quickly, brushed aside like snow from a sleeve. Life went on. When the snow fell heavily, the older children rushed out to sweep the roof, their laughter ringing in the crisp air, their boots crunching on the frozen ground. Yuri stood near the door, clapping when the snow slid down in sheets. By dusk, the village was filled with barking dogs and lowing cows, lanterns glowing in every window like watchful eyes. The Kim's lantern was always among them, steady, reassuring. It was a life so normal that no one could have imagined how quickly it would end. That is what makes their story so haunting even today. There was nothing remarkable about the Kims before that night. They were not cursed, not shunned, not the subject of whispers. They were simply a hard-working family, careful and quiet, who could have been anyone's neighbours. And that is what chills investigators. What keeps their case alive after so many decades. If it could happen to the Kims, it could happen to anyone. The very ordinariness of their lives is what makes their disappearance feel like a tear in the fabric of reality. Imagine a camera pulling back slowly from the house on one of those nights. The fields stretching white and endless in every direction, the sky clear and black, the stars sharp as knives. The house glows like a tiny lantern in all that darkness, smoke rising like a prayer. Nothing about the image suggests tragedy. It is quiet, beautiful, whole. And yet, the wind makes the door creak on its hinges. The well stands dark, reflecting nothing, like an unblinking eye. Somewhere far away, a train whistle echoes across the frozen plain, low and mournful, carrying with it a sense that change is coming, that something has already shifted. Inside the house, the children sleep, their breathing even and soft. Mother Kim lies awake, staring at the ceiling. Father Kim turns once, exhales. Tomorrow will be the same as today, they believe. And that belief, that illusion of safety, is what makes what follows so unbearable. Dawn broke over the Gyeonggi Hills, the kind of brittle winter morning when sound carries farther than it should, and yet the Kim farmhouse made none. No smoke unfurled from its chimney, no faint glow of the kitchen fire pushed back the grey. This was wrong in a way that struck the villagers like a cold splash. In this place, in this season, stoves are living clocks, tended by duty before the rooster's second cry. The Kims were nothing if not predictable. Father Kim, meticulous, lined the gate bar perfectly each night, horizontal, level as a spirit measure. This morning the bar was aligned as always, exactly as if his hand had placed it before he turned in. The precision should have been comforting. Instead, it felt staged, like a still life painted by a careful, absent hand. A boy on his way to fetch water stopped to look. He was 11, old enough to know that people's lives run on grooves like mill wheels, that they do not suddenly jump the track. Maybe they overslept, he said, but his own voice sounded thin in the cold. The Kims never overslept. Oversleeping meant cold rice, late chores, bad fortune for the day. His mother always said bad fortune grows where discipline falters. He told himself it was just the wind keeping the smoke down, though the air was still as glass. A hen broke from the neighbour's yard, flapping across the courtyard as though chased, scattering fresh snow into comets. The boy laughed nervously, not at the hen, but at himself, as though laughter could thaw the chill creeping under his coat. He noticed, though, that the hen froze at the threshold, one claw suspended, neck outstretched toward the shut door, before scuttling away. The gate creaked faintly when pushed. The door itself opened too easily, no groan from frozen hinges. It was as if the house had been waiting. Inside, the scene was wrong in ways that piled up like snowdrifts. Bowls of rice sat on the low table, still warm enough to mist if you held your palm above them. Quilts on the platform bore the impressions of sleeping bodies, the soft dip where a child's knees had pressed, the fold where someone had turned over in the night. Small cloth shoes were paired neatly by size along the wall, toes pointing outward, ready for little feet to slip in. Everything was too arranged, too peaceful, as though a family had been spirited up mid-breath. The boy's cousin arrived and whistled softly. Maybe they went to help at the kiln, he said, but his words were more offering than explanation. If they had left, why leave the rice hot, the quilts rumpled, the shoes inside? On the doorframe, a faint spiral of chalk wound inward. It wasn't a word or a talisman, just a curling line like a snail shell. The boy told himself it was from some childish game, a leftover doodle. Still, he did not touch it. Word spread fast, as it does in villages where news is quicker than wind. Soon the headman came with 2 men and a girl carrying a kettle for tea. The headman was a broad-shouldered man who believed that order could be restored by naming things properly. "We will check each room," he said, with a tone that dared the house to argue. He stepped inside first, but even he hesitated a breath at the threshold. In the main room, the brazier held a shallow layer of ash and a single half-burnt incense stick that had gone out on its own. No smoke scented the air. The headman tapped it. Ash broke and fell like tired snowflakes. "They must have gone early," one man said. "Maybe a messenger came. Maybe a cousin was sick." His words sounded hollow. The girl lifted the rice lids again and watched steam wreath her wrist like ghostly threads. The boy drifted to the wall where children's drawings hung, charcoal sketches of pigs, of the house, of a dragon with too many legs. One had been smeared, a hand dragged hastily through it. He rubbed his own fingers together, half expecting fresh charcoal to smudge them, though none did. "They were playing," he said, pointing to the chalk spiral, choosing to make it into a game board. "They toss stones and whoever hits the middle wins." He flicked an imaginary pebble toward it and grinned, but no one returned the grin. They moved through the house, deeper into its stillness. Houses usually hold their own heat, especially with rice freshly cooked, but here the air grew colder, room by room. The headman placed 2 fingers on the quilt impression and felt the cloth slowly rise back, as though the memory of the child's body had just then been released. He straightened and spoke briskly, as if to scold himself. "They left before dawn. The rice was for later. They have outside shoes." His words were little boats across a rising tide of unease. Outside, the yard gave no new answers. The well bucket sat full, rope taut, as though drawn and then forgotten. The water surface was black and still, with a ladle floating upside down, oddly unmoving, as if the water had thickened. The headman leaned close, called down, and heard only his echo. "We'll fetch the constable," he said. At the back step, they found another spiral, faint, almost erased by boots, this one spinning outward, the reverse of the first. The boy announced too quickly that this proved it was just children's scribbles, like the games they played in school. He walked around it, not through it. More villagers came, curious and wary, until the small rooms were crowded with their breath clouding the air. Someone lit the kettle, poured tea, set cups on the table, as though the act might summon the family back. The girl with the kettle poured one extra cup, then two, because she felt sure there were more chairs usually. She could not remember how many. The math refused to come to her. She told herself this was nerves. The boy, braver now with the house full of people, lifted the corner of a quilt and found a doll wrapped in striped cloth, its button eyes staring, a red string tied in its hair. He held it up and made a joke about the Kims leaving their baby behind, but no one laughed. He tucked it back carefully, smoothing the cloth. The headman opened the chest and found Father Kim's ledger. The final entry was rushed, letters crimped as though written in dim light by someone trying to copy Father Kim's hand and almost succeeding. He wrote in haste, the headman said, and closed the book. By late morning, more theories floated like sawdust. A birth, a death, a message from town. Each theory was a plank trying to cover the whole of dread, but the house would not relax. The constable arrived by noon, a man with town-cold eyes and a notebook. He recorded the facts: shoes, quilts, warm rice, and underlined rice warm once before scratching the line out. He pressed his thumb to the chalk spiral, smearing it, and nothing happened, which almost disappointed him. "Keep the door barred," he instructed. "We'll patrol the roads." He left forms for missing persons, procedures for tragedies that usually announce themselves with fire or shouting, not silence. That night the villagers lit their stoves early, smoke rising like prayers. All but one. The Kim house remained dark, door barred now by the headman's own hand. People hurried past it on the road, muttering that surely the family would return tomorrow. Surely there was some simple reason. Still, mothers tied red threads above their door lintels before sleep. On the second dawn, the house was the same. No smoke, no sound. The snow around it was unbroken, as though the world had decided to leave it alone. The boy crept near and pressed his palm against the bar the way Father Kim used to, flat and precise, but the wood burned cold against his skin. He jerked back and said nothing. In the years to come, people would speak of these first days as the moment the story shifted from worry to legend. They would list the details like beads on a rosary, the hot rice no one ate, the shoes lined like soldiers, the quilts that remembered bodies too freshly, the spirals of chalk, the too quiet air that even the chickens seemed to respect. Each detail could be dismissed, yes, but together they arranged themselves into a pattern, like filings around a magnet. The village began to sense, not to know, but to sense, that they were standing at the edge of something that would not be put back in order by ledgers or bars or official seals. And though they continued to tell themselves the comforting story, that the Kims would return tomorrow, that letters would come, each sunset made that story thinner, and each smokeless morning made the chalk spiral brighter in their minds. It was no longer a children's game. It was a warning, and the village had already stepped inside it. This version flows continuously, ties all ideas into a single cinematic narration, and builds a mounting sense of dread without breaking into headings or lists. It is 2,200 words and keeps the formula you requested. Unsettling detail, characters trying to rationalize, and the audience sensing that it is a true warning. Neighbors whisper of voices at night, low, rhythmic, neither song nor prayer. The sound blooms from the fallow fields and travels along stone walls, slipping into eaves as if roofs had ears. By sunrise, everyone is practical again. They say wind. They say foxes. They say the mill creaks when the air swings north. Yet when dusk returns, the same notes begin, soft as breath on glass, and the listening starts over. The Kim farmhouse still sits like a lesson in ordinariness. A straight gate bar, a yard dusted with chaff, a kitchen door rubbed smooth by hands. Ordinary things should repeat without malice. Now the repetitions grow wrong. Smoke from the stove reaches the roof and unthreads. The bucket climbs from the well filmed with ice even at noon. Footprints arrive where the ground is packed like baked clay. Strange events repeat, and each repetition shortens the distance between them. Children once crossed the yard as a shortcut to the path. Lately they keep to the edge, counting stones under their breath. They mumble a line no one admits to teaching them. 1 step, 2 step, don't look in. They say it grinning, then sprint. When a mother asks why, a girl shrugs. For fun, she lies, eyes fixed beyond the mother's shoulder. The village starts avoiding the family name. People point with their chins instead of fingers. The last house, they say, and let the phrase close the subject like a lid. A week after the first whispers, a ring of charred ash appears in the far corner of the yard, narrow and exact, as if poured from a careful hand. No one saw a fire, no one claims the ring. The hens refuse that side of the fence. A stray dog noses close, sneezes, and beds down outside the gate with its back turned to the yard. At night the voices seem to walk the arc of the ash, heel and toe, keeping time that ordinary clocks ignore. The constables make a round at the elder's insistence. They find the gate bar aligned. They lift the latch looped with the faded ribbon Father Kim knotted for luck. Dust motes float in the kitchen like patient bees. Under a folded quilt, their hands discover a small notebook as if the bed itself wished to speak. One reads while the other jokes to be brave. Under a quilt, constables find a notebook, entries turning frantic. Voices tell us frost will not lift until the offering is set. He laughs at the word offering, sets the book back and dusts his palms. They look for practical clues, the kind that become reports. The pantry jars are full. The hearth holds ash as fine as flour. The wash basin is dry. They open the door to the stair and feel the temperature fall as if the steps led to late January. The lantern flame tightens to a sharp blue kernel. Draft, one says, but his voice tilts higher. They shut the door, assure each other that families panic and flee, and that hunger has a way of shepherding people home. On their way out, one taps the chalk spiral on the doorframe and tries to smudge it. The line does not smear, it seems to deepen. By the second week, repetition becomes routine. The same low rhythm pours over the fields at night. The same faint tapping visits 2 windows, then a third. Laundry hangs 3 days without losing its damp. Rice in a jar settles as if a hand pressed it gently from above. The ash ring, raked at dawn, is whole again by dusk and a finger width wider. Women leaving the well tip their pails and pretend not to watch the lane as water slings in a bright arc to the ditch. They tell each other to stop spooking themselves. The telling is a kind of prayer. Mother Kim's sister arrives from the next village with dried fish and certainty. She has walked difficult roads and polite lies cannot bar her. The gate is unlatched when she reaches it. She calls a greeting, steps into the kitchen, and sets the fish on the table. The bowl beside it holds rice dusted with frost that refuses to melt. On the surface sit pale filaments like the ghosts of thread. She touches the bowl. It is warm. She takes back her hand, as if the warmth were the stranger. A sound falls upstairs, not a crash, but a careful settling, like a body deciding where to sleep. She tries the stair and feels cold breathe against her shins. She stands, listening, and hears the voices beyond the walls, not louder, just closer. Her mouth forms the family name and cannot push it out. She leaves the fish and goes, promising aloud to return with help. That night her daughter wakes with the taste of ash on her tongue, and cannot explain why she shivers when she drinks. The next morning the ring in the yard is darker, like a line that has learned to feed itself. Hens cluck as if scolding a child behind a wall. Somewhere a door thumps once, then stays meekly closed. The voices do not grow louder. They grow nearer. The difference matters. People hear their own names in the rhythm and cannot swear the names were spoken. A clerk appears, skinny, spectacled, fond of numbers and the safety of tidy rows. He counts fence posts, steps, windows, tiles, and splits beans on the table to make the total even. He writes in a stuttering hand and nods. Patterns, he says to no one. He does not touch the spiral. He follows its curve in the air with a finger and watches his finger shiver. He reads the notebook under the quilt and stops on the word offering, as if the page has raised a blister he will not press. He copies nothing and says he'll return tomorrow. He does not. Strange events repeat, intensity increases, and belief becomes a rumor people will not claim as theirs. A gang of bored boys dare each other to step across the ash ring at sunset. The air inside is still, as if a door has been shut behind them. One boy hiccups and hears the sound echo as if down a well. They retreat laughing because laughter feels like a rope. That night, the hiccuping boy wakes curled near his own gate, body locked like a seed. In the morning he cannot explain the frost printed on his sleeve in a perfect circle. The well begins to falter. The rope groans when there is no weight on it. The bucket comes up with a thin rim of ice, even when the water itself is not frozen. A neighbour leans over and sees, for a single blink, his own eye looking back as if the well were a mirror turned wrong. He swears to keep that to himself, then fails and tells 3 people in a whisper. By sundown, the whole village knows and claims not to care. A woman swears she saw a child's small shoes lined up by the threshold one afternoon. None the Kim children wore, sizes stepping down like notes on a flute. She blinked, and the shoes were gone. Another man finds pine sprigs tied to the gate with damp string. He unties the string and finds his fingers shining as if he had dipped them in winter light. He tells himself he is foolish. He burns the string. It smokes and refuses to flame. A neighbour finally walks to the house with a scrap of bravado she pretends is duty. She closes the loose gate, lifts the bar, and smooths the ribbon. She sets a bowl of radishes on the stoop and steps back. The door shivers in its frame just once, like a sleeper testing the edge of waking. She decides the door does no such thing. She crosses to the ash ring and presses her shoe to the line. Ash collapses and then regathers under her sole, a second skin. She leaves with her breath held inside her teeth. That night she wakes convinced someone is standing beside her bed, listening for a word she cannot bear to say. The chalk spiral on the door frame should have faded by now. Instead it deepens, not chalk, but something like chalk with memory. A constable taps it again despite the shiver in his elbows. He smears nothing. The spiral looks damp and new, as if drawn from inside the wood. He jokes to the other constable that village children sneak in to redraw it, then swallows his joke as if it were a pill. Later, he will say the house is only a house. Later, He will admit he stopped using that lane at dusk. As the third week wanes, the frost on window panes begins to arrange itself into pictures. At first, the images are ordinary: fern, feather, riverbed. Then they begin to organize: a bar across a square, two rings that kiss at one point, a handprint so detailed each whirl suggests a name. Neighbors tell themselves patterns appear because minds hunger for them. Still, watching the melt begin at noon, it is hard not to feel the patterns watching back. The voices at night change key. They no longer sound far across the fields. They settle over the yard the way fog settles over water, the way a hand settles on a child's head before a blessing. They ask and answer a question no one will confess to understanding. A man thinks he hears his name, and his own mouth shapes the sound in reply before he stops it with his teeth. The silence that follows tastes metallic, like a coin. By day, the village acts busy, because busy looks like bravery. By night, everyone counts. They count the steps in the rhythm. They count the breaths they hold between the low notes. They count the days since anyone has seen the Kims and then feel ashamed of counting. No one admits to waiting, but everyone waits, and the waiting becomes a net that catches them each evening by the throat. Toward month's end, a thin snow begins that refuses to land within the yard. Flakes drift toward the ground and vanish a foot above the soil, the way ash sometimes dissolves above fire. On the gate and the eaves, however, frost thickens like script. Elders stop to read without admitting they are reading. They think they see a path. They think they see a circle broken and then closed. They think they see the sign for a debt paid and another owed. The notebook under the quilt waits for hands to open it. Someone opens it. The later pages show a hand that races faster than sense. The offering was set. The frost held firm. The voices asked again. The measure was wrong. The lines break. The charcoal deepens. Names appear in a column, some crossed lightly, some with the cross stroke heavy as a railing. The last blank at the bottom overwhelms the reader more than the words above it. The reader closes the notebook and puts it away, as if returning an animal to its burrow. The village tells itself there is nothing to fear. Then it rearranges its habits to avoid fear's path. People go the long way to the mill. They pause before they speak the word offering, even when they mean bread or help or a hand. They do not discuss circles. They pretend children are not muttering when they pass a corner. The pretending is an effort. The effort is its own ritual. The ritual is almost a prayer. No one else notices or believes. That is the sentence they repeat, one by one, half prayer, half excuse. And yet when a door thuds once across the lane, everyone lifts a head at the same time. When an ox refuses to pass the gate, 4 men lift the cart rather than pull. When a chicken lays a paper-thin egg that collapses into itself, the farmer pours the mess into the ditch and washes his hands for too long. He says nothing happened. He looks ill. What is true is simple. The repetitions gather. The ring's line grows truer. The spiral deepens. The rhythm learns the names of the people who insist they don't hear it. The ordinary buckles a little. The Kim house holds its breath, and the village learns to breathe around it, awkward and careful, as if carrying a bowl filled to the lip. Somewhere beyond the fields, a dog howls and is answered by nothing, and the tension builds the way winter builds, flake by flake, hour by hour, the roofline unchanged until it is suddenly heavy. The last ordinary day passes without anyone recognizing it as such. A pot simmers. A latch sits loyally in its loop. The ash ring waits, patient as a shut eye. Night comes on in a clean sweep. The voices collect themselves. The village inhales and pretends it is not listening. The story has not chosen its shape yet. The shape, however, has started choosing them. They pried open the cellar as if cracking the jaw of something that had clenched against screams for decades, the iron ring hissing in Father Kim's hand, where the frozen metal stuck to his skin. Constable Co wedged his crowbar beneath the swollen hatch, wood fibres popping one by one in a brittle cascade. Lantern light spilled down the first rung of the ladder and caught a glimpse of soot, black and glistening like scales. No one spoke for a moment because the silence below did not feel empty. It felt watchful. Father Kim set his jaw because that was what he always did when the cattle needed tending or the gate bar had jammed. He was the one who had gone first every morning to align the farm to the day, and now he would go first to align it back to itself. The ladder groaned under his weight, each rung a bone, 10 rungs, then 12, and his boots touched packed earth. He lifted the lantern and the cellar took a breath. The air that rose was not just stale damp, but something sweeter, sickly, the way fermenting grain smells right before it goes wrong. Teacher Choi, unable to help himself, narrated under his breath as he scribbled. Lantern light falls on carved spirals, soot-blackened walls, the habit of turning fact into record, giving his voice an eerie calm. The spirals on the walls resolved into order as the lantern climbed higher. Rings upon rings, cut thin and deep, each groove darkened as though filled with old ash. It looked less like a wall and more like the inside of something that had been turning for a long time. Auntie Keong, still halfway up the ladder, whispered a prayer she would later deny. Seo descended behind Father Kim, boots slow and measured, crowbar ready though it felt like a child's toy against whatever had lived here. When their eyes adjusted, they saw the niches, 6 of them, hollowed from the wall, edges charred. Inside lay small bundles of bone, clean and deliberate, arranged like loaves on offering day. Not whole skeletons, those were missing, but finger bones, toe bones, fragile little arcs placed in crowns and spirals that echoed the wall. On a stone ledge, wax had melted and cooled into a pond that caught the lantern's flame and bent it until the reflection seemed to shiver. Wicks lay like drowned hair, and there, folded with a care that was almost gentle, lay a quilt Mother Kim had stitched in spring. Cream cotton with red flowers embroidered small enough to delight a child's eyes. The petals were almost black now, the fabric stiff, the smell unmistakable. Iron and mildew and something that did not belong to the living. Father Kim stepped closer and the seller breathed again, slower this time, as if measuring him. "Back up," Co said, but his voice betrayed that he too had stepped nearer. The spirals on the wall seemed to shift, not moving exactly, but the longer you looked, the more they felt as if they were spinning slowly inward, drawing your gaze toward the center. Somewhere in the far corner, something dripped into a shallow bowl carved into the floor, steady and rhythmic. It was not water. It hissed faintly on impact. Teacher Choi stopped writing, every muscle taut, his lips moving in silent arithmetic as if counting could make sense of the scene. Then came the sound, faint at first, so faint they thought it might be the drip-forming words in their imagination. A whisper rose from nowhere, low and dragging, the shape of syllables without clarity. Then the whisper numbered them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, clicking each count like beads. The lantern glass chimed softly as though something had tapped it with a fingernail. Father Kim crouched toward the quilt, not because he wanted to, but because some ancient reflex told him that if he could just touch the familiar, the nightmare would break. His hand hovered inches above it when the fabric stirred on its own, a corner lifting as though tugged from underneath. Threads trembled and folded into a spiral that matched the ones on the wall. The seller breathed a third time, and soot fell in thin strands, like burned hair, streaming toward the niches, as if bone were magnetic. The grooves darkened, the drip quickened, and the counting stopped. In the silence, something new began. A child's whisper, clearer now, dragging across the floor like fog. The word formed with difficulty, like a mouth unused to speech. Appa. Father Kim's knees buckled. The lantern light dimmed, and then threw long, unnatural shadows onto the wall. 6 small silhouettes appeared, heads bowed toward the altar, and when they turned, the air dropped to freezing. Auntie Kyung gasped and clutched her kerchief as frost feathered along the edge of the ladder rung. The first blow came without warning, an invisible strike to the back of Father Kim's knees that sent him crashing to the ground. The lantern rolled away and extinguished, leaving them half blind. The remaining light revealed something new, a woman's foot descending the ladder, bare, pale, toes dripping dark water that vanished before it reached the soil. Her white blouse glowed faintly, her hair hung wet, sticking to her face and her mouth, and when she spoke, the words fogged the air separately. "Tell it right." The men froze. SEO raised his lantern, and its light found a familiar jawline under a pallor that belonged to no living skin, a pair of eyes that held too many pupils, like seeds within seeds. Her blouse wasn't cloth, but the top layer of the quilt itself, stitched and tied with red thread that bit into her ribs. "Mother Kim," Father Kim breathed, gratitude and terror tangled in the same syllable. She tilted her head with a sound like a door opening and repeated, "Tell it right." Then the cellar erupted. The bowl at the floor hissed as if boiling, the drip becoming a steady stream, and the wax ropes hanging from the beams elongated and twisted downward, trying to snare their ankles. The bones in the niches unstacked one by one, clattering in small rhythms, finger bones crawling like pale spiders toward Father Kim's boots. The spirals on the walls glistened wet, lines of dark fluid tracing fresh paths as though being cut by invisible hands. A new shape materialized between them and the ladder, a tall, scarecrow-like figure, jointed wrong, shoulders uneven, as if weighed by years of penance. Its head turned slowly, revealing a face with too many features, some sliding over one another as if the cellar couldn't decide which memory to wear. The counting began again, faster, and each number hit Father Kim's chest like a blow. 1, 2, 3. The quilt whipped around his torso, pinning his arms, dragging him toward the altar. He fought, shouting for help, but the fabric absorbed the sound like a mouth drinking. Seo dove for the crowbar and swung, tearing the quilt's edge and spraying red thread that squirmed on the ground like worms before crawling back. The woman smiled without moving her lips and said gently, "It is not a garment. It is a promise." Teacher Choi finally moved, shoving his notebook into his teeth and dragging Auntie Kyung backward from the bone-littered floor. The tall figure advanced with dreadful patience, and the spirals on the wall opened like eyes. In that moment, Father Kim understood the danger was not that he would die here, but that he would live, carrying the cellar's mark up into the world. He screamed, "Take me! Leave the children!" The figure paused, tilting its head, and behind it, the spiral seemed to open into deeper rooms, endless chambers, where frost fell like dust and shadows circled slowly. The smell of iron filled the air. SEO swung again, and the crowbar struck stone with a ringing note like a temple bell, breaking the spell for a heartbeat. The quilt loosened, and Father Kim tore himself free, skin ripping under his shirt where stitches had begun to form. The cellar shrieked, a sound so high it split the lantern glass. Wax ropes lashed wildly. Teacher Choi shoved Father Kim toward the ladder, shouting through blood from his bitten tongue, "Climb!" Auntie Kyung scrambled up, sobbing, followed by Father Kim, leaving shreds of coat behind. SEO jammed the crowbar across the rungs as a brace and turned to face the advancing shape, empty-handed but unbowed. The last thing they heard before the hatch slammed was the woman's voice, soft and final. "Choose your pattern." They burst into the kitchen as chalk spirals began curling up the door frames, the entire house joining the ritual. Frost climbed the walls like ivy. They ran through the courtyard, feet slicing through ice crystals that rose and stung their ankles. At the gate, the bar slammed into place by itself, a cruel echo of every morning's habit. Father Kim tore it free with bleeding hands, and they spilled into the lane just as a low laugh rolled from the cellar like thunder from underground. They did not stop running until they reached the frozen creek. Only there did they collapse, gasping, the night sky above a scatter of stars that did not care. Auntie Kyung's wrist was swollen, Father Kim's chest ached where the quilt had gripped him, and Teacher Choi stared at his empty hands before making the motion of writing in the air. "We will be out if we tell it," he said, half mad with exhaustion. Behind them, the farmhouse breathed once more, a sound like a sleeping child turning over, and then went silent. Not peaceful, waiting. And somewhere inside their ears, the counting began again, softer now but certain. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because some stories never end until they are told exactly right. Constable Arn ran first. His boots slammed against the cellar steps, as if the earth itself wanted to keep him down there, and for a breathless instant, he thought he would not make it. The lantern slipped from his hand, shattered, and the brief flare lit the walls in a nightmare flash. The soot-black bricks seemed to twist inward. The carved spirals pulsed like the veins of some living thing, and on the altar, the wax appeared to ripple as though something beneath it was exhaling. Arn shoved past his fellow officers and burst into the night air, lungs seared by winter wind, vision swimming. He did not stop running until the house was out of sight, until the pounding of his heart was louder than the whispers he thought he still heard following him. When the others found him hours later, crouched near the well, his hands were still clamped over his ears, and he was shaking so hard that they thought he had been poisoned. Only at dawn did he manage to scrawl 3 words into his notebook. Unlawful gathering found. Nothing more. Nothing about the bones in the niches. Nothing about the quilt stiff with stains. Nothing about the breathing air. It was safer this way, he told himself. Safer for them all. And yet he knew he had left the truth sealed in the dark, where it still waited. Within a week, every constable on the team found a reason to vanish. Some feigned illness. Others begged transfer to distant counties. One simply disappeared without filing the proper papers. The farmhouse was officially quarantined and the cellar door nailed shut, but no one volunteered to check the seal. At night, Arn dreamed the door stood open and something was climbing the stairs. Rumours began to crawl across the province like a sickness. In markets and tea houses, people whispered of the Kim farmhouse, of a spiral that swallowed a family whole. Mothers warned their children not to look when passing the lane. Farmers hammered new talismans above their gates and smeared lime across their thresholds, muttering old prayers under their breath. The village headman tried to quell the talk, but his own face had gone grey. A young reporter from Gyeongsong caught wind of the strange police withdrawal and bribed a clerk for access to the archive. In the confiscated notebook, he found entries that turned frantic toward the end, lines pressed so hard the pen tore the page. They say the frost will not lift until the offering is set. Tonight we carve the names. The reporter photographed every page and sent them to his editor, who printed them in a Sunday edition that sold out by noon. The headlines screamed of secret blood rite in rural farmhouse. People across the province devoured the story, crowding around newspaper stands, shoving coins at vendors. The most terrifying image was the map of concentric spirals drawn on the cellar wall with every family name written inside. Some were crossed out. Some were marked in black. People found their own surnames near the centre and fled that very night, abandoning homes and fields. The village unravelled. Old grudges resurfaced. Accusations flew. Neighbours shouted across fences about which ancestor had started the curse. The headman shaved his head and left for a monastery. the school closed. Those who stayed nailed charms to their doors and stopped speaking after dusk. For the surviving members of the Kim family, the disgrace was unbearable. The youngest boy was sent away to relatives in Busan. The eldest daughter never returned from the city. The farm was sold for half its value, but no one dared move in. The windows were boarded, the gate tied shut with rope, and the place was left to sag into weeds. Constable Ahn, who had fled first, never recovered. He slept with a candle burning until dawn and scratched spirals into the tabletop with his nails until his wife cried. He died young, white-haired, still muttering about the cellar that breathed. The reporter who broke the story was celebrated at first, then began to unravel. He dreamed of frost-covered spirals and woke with chalk dust under his fingernails. One morning, his boarding room floor was found covered edge to edge with spirals. He swore he had no memory of drawing them. Within a year he was gone, his suitcase found at a ferry dock. His name added by gossip to the list of those taken. By spring, the frost melted, but not in people's hearts. The village never returned to its old rhythm. The well near the farm was filled in, as if closing a wound. Children were warned never to play near that field, never to speak the Kim's name after dark. Travellers swore that when they passed the farmhouse at night, they heard a faint sound, not wind, not animal, but chanting, slow and rhythmic, like a prayer older than language. One elderly midwife, summoned to testify before the district council, said only, "The house has chosen new keepers. It is not finished. It will not be finished until the last name is crossed out." Even those who had fled far away carried the scar in silence. Years later, when their children asked why they never went back, they had no answer that made sense. Some refused to speak of the Kims at all. Others became obsessed with tracing family lines, as if to prove they were not part of the spiral's centre. And so the story lived on, half witnessed, half whispered, passed down not as history, but as a wound. Those who had seen the cellar grew old with haunted eyes, their lives bent around the memory. They had survived, yes, but just barely. They had crawled out of the dark, and the dark had let them go only because it wanted someone left to tell the tale. Picture it now, the farmhouse under a swollen moon, gate sagging, weeds high, windows blind. Inside, the air still holds the stink of smoke and wax. The cellar door groans when the wind pushes it, as if breathing. And if someone dared to go down tonight, they might find fresh wax on the altar, still warm, as if someone had just left. Or worse, still burning, waiting for the next name. The bell in the village square rang long before dawn, its sound carrying like a hollow bone through the frost-laden air. The villagers emerged one by one, breath steaming, faces pinched from both cold and worry. In the centre of the square, the Kims stood like ghosts who had already seen their own funeral rites. Father Kim's shoulders were squared but tense, his jaw locked. Mother Kim held the youngest child close, the others clustered around her skirts, silent as if they knew this was no ordinary summons. The constables who had been in the cellar the night before were pale, their boots still caked with the soot of the altar room, their eyes wide and hollow. They had seen something they did not yet have words for, but the ledgers in their hands trembled like living things, eager to speak. From the edge of the gathering, an old woman shuffled forward. Kang So-min, the midwife who had delivered most of the children in the village, including each of the Kim children, stood straight despite the curve of her back. Her shawl was stiff with frost, but when she opened her mouth, her voice was clear and unshaking. "It was never murder," she said, and every head turned toward her. "It was balance. Each generation pays." A ripple of murmurs broke through the crowd. Someone gasped that Kang So-min had lived through the famine 30 years ago, when the river froze solid and the roads were blocked for weeks, and no rice came from Seoul. She nodded once, a small, grave motion, as though to confirm every whispered suspicion. Back then, she began, our granaries were empty, our bellies empty too. The ground was so hard we could not dig to bury our dead. We gathered here, in this very square, and the council lit incense and begged the mountain spirit for a sign. Her fingers twisted into her shawl, pulling the memory up as though it were caught in a deep well. The answer came in a dream, she said. The eldest Kim, the grandfather of this man here, dreamed of a spiral in the snow, perfect and unbroken, leading to the cellar where you stood last night. The shamans said the spirit had chosen them. The Kims would be the keepers of the covenant. They would bear the weight, so that the rest of us might live. Gasps echoed again, a strange mix of awe and dread. The first offering was willing, Kang Somin went on, a goat slaughtered under the frost moon. We watched the blood steam in the snow. Within the week, the famine broke. Rice arrived from the capital. The babies stopped dying. We took this as a sign that the covenant was real. And so, every 7 winters, the Kims were called. Sometimes it was a chicken, sometimes a calf, but the offering was always theirs to give. As the years passed, the requests grew heavier. We asked for more because the fields demanded more, because the rains did not come, because someone's son was sick. Each time the Kims gave, and each time we thanked them and went back to our full bowls. Her voice wavered now, but she forced herself to continue. I was there, the year the council decided a child was needed. A shocked hiss moved through the crowd. I begged them to choose another way, she said, her eyes shining wetly in the lantern light. But the harvest had failed 3 seasons. We had no seed left. The people were desperate. They said the Kims had been chosen for this very purpose, that their blood would keep the land alive. Mother Kim's sob was a ragged tear through the silence. She clutched her youngest so tightly the child whimpered. Kang So-min's voice cracked. The last time, it went too far. They came for the second son. Father Kim fought them. There was blood in the yard, blood not meant for offering. After that, the Kims closed their gates. They refused to come to council meetings. And when the frost came again, we feared we had doomed ourselves. One of the constables opened the soot-blackened ledger, its pages still smelling of damp earth. By lantern light, he revealed the writing, names of families written in careful brushstroke, each marked with a spiral. Some spirals had been crossed out, others circled, as if waiting. His finger landed on the Kim family line. Here, he said, his voice tight. 6 names, 4 spirals crossed, 2 left unfinished. A chill rippled through the square. The meaning was unmistakable. The covenant was not complete. The other constable stepped forward and held up the wooden tablet found under the cellar altar. The spiral motif was carved into it, but a jagged notch cut through its center. This was no random gathering place, the constable said quietly. This was a temple. Father Kim finally spoke, his voice hoarse. You call this balance, he said, but it is a curse. My children will not pay for the sins of those who came before me. His defiance broke the fragile stillness. Villagers began to shout, some in agreement, others panicked, fearful of angering whatever power had kept them fed all these years. The wind rose suddenly, scattering ash from the constable's boots, carrying the smell of burnt wax across the square. Then, as if in answer to the argument, the well groaned. A thin coil of steam rose from it, despite the freezing temperature, and before the crowd's eyes, a new spiral appeared in the snow, curling delicately toward the direction of the Kim house. No one moved. It felt as though the ground itself had spoken. It was Lan, the historian from Beijing, who broke the silence. Her notebook shook in her hands as she pieced the fragments together. The chalk spiral on the doorframe, she said. It wasn't just a mark. It was a signal to the council that the family was ready. And the quilt embroidered with red flowers we found in the cellar. That was never meant to warm a bed. It was a ritual cloth. She swallowed hard. The bowls of rice left warm on the table? They weren't abandoned in fear. They were prepared for a vigil. They were waiting for someone to come. She looked around at the villagers, who stared back at her as if she were some kind of seer. The diary entries we found. Voices tell us frost will not lift until the offering is set. That was Father Kim trying to warn himself, to keep his resolve. He knew the council would come for them. He knew that if they refused, something worse might follow. The constables nodded grimly. The bones, the wax pooled on the altar, the ledgers. It's all part of the same thing, Lan said. The house didn't just keep secrets. It kept the history of this covenant. And when we opened that cellar, we broke the seal. Kang So-min turned her gaze to Lan. Then tell it right, she said. Tell the world what happened here. If the story is spoken, perhaps the land will forgive us. Perhaps the next generation will not be called. Lan felt the weight of that request settle over her, like snow on an old roof. She had come here as an observer, a collector of history, but now she realized she was no longer just documenting it. She was part of it. She was the witness the covenant had been waiting for. Around them, the villagers fell into uneasy silence. Some crossed themselves. Some wept quietly. The wind died down, leaving only the creak of the well rope swinging. The spiral in the snow began to melt, leaving a dark, wet scar in the earth. Lan closed her notebook. History doesn't just sit quietly in the ground, she said, her voice low. It waits, and if we don't tell it, it comes knocking. The villagers lowered their heads. No one spoke the word curse. No one needed to. The meaning was already carved into the frost and the earth and the frightened hearts standing in the square. What do you think? Is a house just wood and stone? Or can it hold a memory that refuses to die? The Kim farmhouse wasn't just a crime scene. In rural Korean tradition, when tragedy strikes a family, the land remembers. Villagers speak of the debt of the harvest, a belief that every fortune must be balanced, every blessing repaid. The spirals carved into the cellar walls weren't random scratches. They were markers, recording who had paid and who still owed. This is why the story still matters. It isn't just about one winter night in 1938. It's about how fear and ritual shape a community, how silence can stretch across generations. Some houses don't just keep ghosts, they keep history hostage, waiting for someone brave enough to open the door and tell the truth. So, what would you do if you heard the whisper, "Don't let him in"? Would you obey, or face what waits inside? Comment "spiral" if you'd dare open the door. Comment silence if you'd run, if you'd and subscribe. Because more true mysteries and haunted places are waiting, and you won't want to miss what comes next.